Good Friday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for February the 16th. Today, we're reading together here in Psalm number 21, which is subheaded The King's Victory. And we are told that it is for the choir director, a Psalm of David. Many people believe that Psalm 21 and Psalm Psalm 21 and Psalm 20 are linked together. They do share some common ideas. Most specifically, the idea of victory. Victory is discussed in Psalm 20 and verses 5 and 6. Let us shout for joy at your victory. And then in verse number 6, now I know that Yahweh gives victory to his anointed. So victory, or some translations might talk about this being salvation. Victory and salvation are most certainly connected with Yahweh's king, who is his great representative among his people. So it makes sense for us then to have these two Psalms back to back, one talking about a prayer for victory, and then the next, a text that talks about thanksgiving for the victory that God has achieved through and for his king. So let me get the text of Psalm 21 up on the screen, and we'll read along together here. Psalm 21 in verse number 1. This psalm probably qualifies best again as a royal psalm, and there are again certainly undertones of thanksgiving as well. So, but we will say this is a royal psalm since the king is the central figure here within the psalm, and really the central subject, of course, Yahweh being the most central figure, but the subject matter does pertain to the king more than anything else. So let's read that here, Psalm 21 in verse number 1. Yahweh, the king finds joy in your strength. How greatly he rejoices in your victory. You have given him his heart's desire and have not denied the request of his lips. Selah. For you meet him with rich blessings. You place a crown of pure gold on his head. He asked you for life, and you gave it to him, length of days forever and ever. Verse number 5, his glory is great through your victory. You confer majesty and splendor on him. You give him blessings forever. You cheer him with joy in your presence. For the king relies on Yahweh. Through the faithful love of the Most High, he, the king, is not shaken. Your hand will capture all your enemies. Your right hand will seize those who hate you. You make them burn like a fiery furnace when you appear. Yahweh will engulf them in his wrath, and fire will devour them. You will wipe their progeny from the earth and their offspring from the human race. Though they intend to harm you and devise a wicked plan, they will not prevail. Instead, you will put them to flight when you ready your bowstrings to shoot at them. Be exalted, Yahweh, in your strength. We will sing and praise your might. And that is Psalm number 21. Again, common themes connecting this with Psalm 20 is the theme of the king and also the theme of victory. Again, Psalm 20 verses 5 and 6 connect with the victory that is stated in Psalm 21 in verses 1 and 5. So what do we have here within this psalm? Certainly in verses 1 through 7, we see that Yahweh is the source of blessings, that the king finds joy where? We'll notice that in a second. That he rejoices where? Where does the king's heart's desire come from? Who does he go to for requests, for the many requests? Where does he enjoy blessings? Where does he receive a crown of pure gold on his head? Who gave him life? Who allowed him to have majesty and splendor? Who gives him blessings? Who cheers him along? All of these things are sourced in Yahweh. Yahweh, verse number 1, the king finds joy in your strength. He rejoices greatly in your victory. You have given him desires, or his heart's desires. You have not denied his request. You meet him with rich blessings. You place a crown on his head. He asks you for life, and you gave it to him. length of days, glory forever and ever. His glory is great through your victory. You confer majesty and splendor. You give him blessings. You cheer him with joy in your presence. Verse number 7 really summarizes the rest of this very well. For the king relies on Yahweh. He relies on Yahweh. Remember the last psalm that we read on Wednesday, Psalm 20, where it talks about some taking pride in chariots and others in horses, but he says that our pride is in the name of Yahweh. Here, a very similar idea is being put forth, that he relies on Yahweh. His trust is in Yahweh. Yes, most certainly, it is God's faithful love that causes all these things to happen. And very not unsurprisingly, the king here is not shaken because he relies upon Yahweh's faithful love. Because Yahweh's faithful love is never shaken, therefore he too will never be shaken. As opposed to what we see with horses and chariots who sometimes fail us or fail. That's not true with God. That's not true with his hesed, with his faithful love, with his loyal love. It never fails. Therefore, the king will never fail so long as the king does his part. What is the king's part? Yes, this all the blessings, everything good that the king enjoys is contingent upon God's faithful love, his goodness, his power, his might, his blessings. But the king is responsible for trusting in Yahweh. That's his responsibility. God does the heavy lifting, but it is the responsibility of the king to trust in Yahweh in everything that he does. If he does that, then Yahweh, who is the true source of all blessings, those blessings will be something that the king himself will be able to experience by God's goodness. So that's verses 1 through 7. Beginning of verse number 8 and going through verse number 12, we have an interesting text here where we just see a lot of pronouns. We see a lot of yous. I don't think there's any yours yet. It's all you. You, hand, your hand will or never, the very first one is yours. Your hand will capture. Your right hand will seize. You will make. Let's see. You will wipe. You will put to flight. The only time we see anybody specifically mentioned is in verse number 9, where it talks about how Yahweh will engulf them in his wrath and fire will devour them. But apart from that, we just have a bunch of yous. So there's some who are who lean one way or the other about who this is about. Is this about what the king will do, or is this about what Yahweh will do? I want to suggest to you that you could read it with both. You could read this as the king will capture his enemies, and his right hand will seize those who hate you. He will make them burn like a fiery furnace when you appear. You will wipe out their project. This could be true of the king, but it most certainly is true of Yahweh. So I would probably tend to read this as these are all things that Yahweh is doing. But even if David here is intending for this to be in reference to the king, we do recognize that the king doesn't do any of these things without Yahweh's strength empowering him to do these things. So even if we want to read it as the king, we do not read it in a vacuum as the king alone is doing these things and accomplishing these things. No. It is Yahweh that is allowing the king to accomplish these things. But I do think probably the smoothest reading of this text is to read the yours and the yous here as a reference to Yahweh. So, your hand will capture all your enemies. Well, Yahweh's strength, his right hand will seize those who hate you. You, Yahweh, will make them burn like a fiery furnace when you appear, Yahweh. And then we see it explicitly. Yahweh will engulf them in his wrath, and fire will devour them. You, Yahweh, will wipe out their progeny from the earth and their offspring from the human race. Complete and total judgment against enemies. We also remember this from back in Psalm number 9 and verses 5 and 6. Talk about something similar to this. Psalm number 9 and verses 5 and 6. You have rebuked the nations. You have destroyed the wicked. You have erased their name forever and ever. The enemy has come to eternal ruin. You have uprooted the cities, and the very memory of them has perished. That speaks of Yahweh's justice being carried out against the wicked. Very similar idea here as well. But God's enemies, notice, though they intend to harm you, which that's interesting. That's one of the I would say probably one of the stronger views that people would argue for against the king. Although we would recognize that to oppose Yahweh's king is to oppose Yahweh himself, and vice versa. If you are going to oppose Yahweh, then you would be opposing the king. If this is we're taking this in from David's perspective. If an enemy opposes me, as let's just say I'm David, if I'm David and an enemy is opposing me, then that enemy is also opposing Yahweh. If the enemy is opposing Yahweh, then I would take that personally. Said, oh, if you're going to attack Yahweh, then you're attacking me as well. So again, there is some overlap here, I would think. But though they intend to harm you and devise a wicked plan, so there's intent to harm, there's the devising of a wicked plan. Here's the reality: they will not prevail. To oppose Yahweh and or to oppose his king is to fail. Why? Instead, you, again, Yahweh, will put him to flight, or put them to flight when you ready your bowstrings to shoot at them. So whenever it comes to the king, there's blessings because there is a trust that the king is to have in Yahweh. There's a reliance that the king is to have in Yahweh. But for the enemies, those who do not want to rely upon Yahweh but intend to harm Yahweh or devise wicked plans, well, those individuals are going to suffer greatly and be opposed by Yahweh, and they're going to fail in what they do. So notice these two distinctions. And notice verse 7, when one relies upon Yahweh through the faithful love of the Most High, through the Hesed of the Most High, he is not shaken. However, those who intend to harm Yahweh or his king and devise a wicked plan, they will not prevail. So one is never shaken when they trust in God's goodness. The other never succeeds, always fails when they oppose God, his king, and the goodness that surround both of them. So considering these two facts, these are just plain truths. These are not just principles, these are truths, absolute truths. Those who rely upon Yahweh succeed and are not shaken, and those who oppose Yahweh, they will never prevail. With these two truths in mind, and especially from the perspective of Yahweh's king, be exalted, Yahweh, in your strength. We will sing and praise your might. He is worthy of praise and might because, again, we see justice here. We see justice in Yahweh's mercy towards the faithful and his judgment against those who oppose him in every way. Now, of course, this psalm is most greatly seen as being true when we consider King Jesus, that these things are most certainly true about Jesus. Jesus, while he was here on the earth, relied upon his Father, his faithful love, and guess what? He was never shaken. And there's also some truth that can be looked at in this text. So we think about being the image of God. What does that mean? Well, it means to rule. Go back to Genesis 1, means to rule and to reign as God's representative. If we, as God's, I'll use this language accommodatively, if we will reign as God's kings and queens of this creation, then we too, if we trust in him in every way, if we rely upon Yahweh through his faithful love, through the faithful love of the Most High, we too will not be shaken. So we see this. We see this with David. When David trusted in Yahweh, he succeeded. Our King Jesus, he always trusted in his Father. He always succeeded. The truth is for us as well. If we will trust in Yahweh, we too will succeed in everything that we do, and we will not be shaken. If you have any questions or comments here about Psalm 21, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. And I do appreciate you taking some time reading along with me on this Friday. Hope you have a great weekend. Looking forward to being with everybody on Sunday for our Bible study and worship assembly. We'll be continuing our study in Mark this Sunday. Looking forward to that. And then on Monday, we will be getting into a longer psalm. 31 verses is Psalm 22, yet it is very, very substantive. There's a lot here in Psalm 22 that we will take some time to consider on Monday. So I do hope that you'll take some time to read along with me on Monday morning. Have a great rest of your Friday and weekend as well. May God bless you in all that you do. Take care. God bless.